Welcome to Access Your Leadership, where we share inspiring career stories and talk about ways you can level up your own leadership potential. I'm your host and coach, Hakeem Lakhtar, and today I'm here with my friend, Roop Sood. Roop is a CEO, owner, and CMO of Fifth Weapon, a digital marketing agency specializing in full funnel strategies for direct-to-consumer brands and service businesses, with a globally distributed team delivering transformational results across multiple sectors. Roop, so good to have you here.
Thank you, Hakeem, for having me.
Well, we'll get right into it. First, with my sort of standard question, share with us today a leadership win of self or of others, personal or professional, that's present for you.
I will share something in terms of a product that we've developed, a productivized service for attorneys. We've developed an AI marketing and sales automation pipeline, which essentially plug and plays into existing law firm businesses. And it's a project that has evolved over 2 to 3 years, I would say, as we dialed in our service offering for law firms. And I'm very excited about it because it's been the culmination of hard work with team members and collating client results using a lot of data. And internally, we had to do a lot of R&D to make sure it got right. And so yeah, I would say that would be a leadership win. And we're ready to go to market, essentially. So here we are. That's it. That's my leadership win.
Congratulations. That's a great leadership win. It's very, I think, easy to maintain the status quo when something's working, the sort of if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of mentality. But to keep innovating, especially when things like AI are coming to the forefront and people are having their mixed emotions about how they want to incorporate AI into what they do, you saw that as an opportunity and clearly, you've leveraged that. So that's a great win.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think to be frank with you, I've done that pretty much every step of my career. I started in the business back in 2004. When we first started in advertising marketing, we were looking at consumer reports, which is just paper reports, and, looking at how people are interacting and how they're responding to different messaging. It wasn't very scientific in the way that we have it today, which is kind of almost immediate in terms of the results that we're getting. But yeah, I mean, every single step you have to be able to evolve because the distribution method just changes. The psychographics of marketing and advertising never changes. And so even with AI is just another tool in the arsenal to basically increase efficiency and increase speed, essentially.
Well, and I can imagine that that's such an essential part of what differentiates you, in what you do and what you offer your clients is that ability to continuously innovate in that way, which is often what businesses are after too. So to be able to do that with your support obviously is extremely valuable. You started to talk a little bit about where you began, starting this business 2004 into 2005 and 6. Let's go further back. Tell us, if you would, where are you from, a little bit about your background and how you came to be doing what you're doing today.
Sure. I was born in Belgium, Brussels. I grew up in Paris and London. My father and his family, his brothers were in the textiles business, fashion business. And so that's probably why I'm so fashionable today. But anyway, grew up there, studied at the London School of Economics and Political Science. I did international relations and history. And then whilst I was there, I got the bug for making, I joined the University of London Film Society, essentially. And yeah, I was also doing theatre and stuff at school, directing plays and things like that. So I was interested in storytelling always. And so that essentially evolved into making a few short films, which did well on the international festival circuit. That led on to a stint at the BBC where, I went into the BBC Arts department, helping them make documentaries and various different arts programs. And that got me headhunted by the advertising people in London to come and do creative campaigns for them, for some of their products. Some of the earliest campaigns that I worked on were Nintendo and a chocolate called Toblerone. I don't know if you remember that.
Oh yeah, of course.
And so, and then that led on to creative direction positions at various different agencies in London, doing accounts such as Ford, Versace and Saatchi, Ogilvy, and brands like British Airways, Rolex, Burberry. And so that's where I really cut my teeth. So, I started off in brand, but in terms of, I guess I've got all the way from the beginning to over here, but
Yeah,
that's how I got there. And then around about 2015 was actually 2014, 2015 is actually when I set up my digital agency. And that's the reason why I did that, is because I saw very quickly and very immediately when we did the launch for Burberry into China, I could see that we were getting information and data back on how people were watching the videos and how people were interacting with the images very quickly. And then when I started exploring the world of digital, I was like, wow, this is insane. We can actually measure people's interaction with our creative almost real time. When, at the story I told you about paper reports, usually we'd have to wait for weeks, if not months,
sure.
before we got data back. So it was just the speed of the data. And so I jumped kind of headfirst into it and set up my agency. We started off in the direct to consumer space and then evolved from there, working with beauty brands, cosmetic brands, and a number of different automotive brands. Still do. And then from there evolved into also working with service businesses, because lead generation businesses. We did a lot of work with roofing, general contracting, until we finally landed on attorneys and law firms, where we found a space that we could actually provide a service that was very valuable to them as well. And so it's been an interesting journey, because everything that I've learned on the e-commerce side, and marketing and advertising on the e-commerce side, and the digital space in that side, I've been able to translate across to the lead generation space, because there's a lot of stuff that they were doing a few years ago, which the lead generation space is only doing now. And the
Yeah,
lead generation space does a lot of things that they don't necessarily do. So I like both disciplines essentially. But for me, it's like I love marketing. I love to wake up and solve the problem. Like, how do I take a person who's completely not aware about something to becoming a raving customer? And that's, mapping that out, and then, being an amateur psychologist to try and work that journey out.
yeah,
That's fun for me. So
yeah.
so I'm kind of, in many ways, I'm very kind of like service and brand agnostic. As long as the challenge is there, that's what I like to do. And, the attorney space, and the reason why we got involved in that is because it's kind of an antiquated industry, vertical, because, a lot of them still caught in SEO and Google, and it's ripe for really, I would say, disruption in that sense. And there's a lot of law firms that can actually benefit from the services that we provide.
Great. Well, and what is evident throughout that whole sort of sharing of your journey is your love of storytelling. And you mentioned that in your earlier years when you were doing theater and film and involved in sort of the production side of all of that, creating that story, did you then, back then, understand that there was a clear love of storytelling and how that would take shape?
Yeah, I mean, I thought I was going to become a feature film director. I mean, I did, I made a bunch of short films. I did produce a couple of feature films as well, but advertising kept calling me, and it was what paid the bills initially. And so, but then more and more as I got into it, I just realized I was very good at it, and I realized I enjoyed doing it. Because the client would come in and they say, okay, well, we need to reach this person. This is the type of demographic it is, and how do we reach them? How do we convey that message that we need to convey? Now, there might be different objectives to the campaign, like you might just want to make them aware to start off with, or you might want them to take a direct action from your campaign. So there are different things, objectives that can be achieved. And then, but they all need to be approached differently. So, for example, like someone who's like not very aware of your service or your product, if you just go straight up to that person, like just imagine if you just walked up to somebody in the street and just say, hey, buy my stuff.
Hmm,
They'd be like, well, who are you?
right.
Right. Where so you have to spend some time getting them to, and this is something that we talk about in our groups, right? And provisors, you have to get them to know, like, and trust you. And so that's a very important part of the first few interactions. First, I would say, Google did a study a few years ago saying that you needed like 127 different interactions before a person was ready to buy something from you, right? But I think that's even more nowadays. So solving those problems is like, you have to understand the psychology of that person. What is it that they want? Where do they hang out? What books do they read? What movies do they like to watch? How do they dress? what do they want from life? What are their goals, their aspirations? What are their fears? All of those questions need to be answered before you can devise a creative campaign that's going to actually resonate and convert for whatever objective it is that you're trying to fulfill.
Yes, there has to be, I mean, clearly a deeper understanding of what makes people tick,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Obviously, and I love that the when you start to think about weaving in the storytelling piece of that, it can't just be any story. It's got to be the quote unquote right story so that it resonates with the right audience. So when you think back to, again, I love sort of seeing the evolution of, Roop as a professional and then ultimately as a business owner and service provider. When you think about even the comment you made about, advertising kept calling you back in, and oh, by the way, it also paid the bills. How did you manage the, okay, this is something that's paying the bills, but also ensuring that your love of it stayed a priority too?
For advertising, you mean?
Yeah, I mean, at that point in your career.
Yeah. Uh, well, I love writing. I love coming up with ideas, like creative ideas. I do it to even today. Like I'll jump in, like with the my ads team, basically, and I'll be like, "Well, what's going on? How are the numbers? Like, what's the CTR? What's the click-through rate? Why is the click-through rate at 2%? Let me look at the creative. Like, what's the creative doing? Okay, we've used this particular type of messaging. What if let's weave this story slightly different? Let's use these words. Let's use this image, or let's use that, etc. So I always loved it, but I guess, like, being young, I thought it was, feature films was also something that was in my horizon in that sense. But the advertising is almost like a little piece of that, right? It's like a microcosm of the feature film
Yeah.
experience. Like, especially in the early days, it's absolutely evolved nowadays. But in the early days, when I was making commercials for cinema and TV, then at that point, it was really, for me, just, it was a microcosm of the feature film world. So I loved doing it. I always loved doing it. But they used to pay me much better than investors who would never pay you anything at all.
Sure.
So yeah, so for me, it was just like, what, I get to write stories and get paid for it. And so yeah, I just, from the beginning, I loved doing it. And then as I kept doing it and doing it and doing it, for me, it's always about uncovering motivation, right? Uncovering the motivation of the person, the prospect, and what's their story. And advertising kept giving me that, especially with the data, as the data, as the analysis of the data has evolved over the last 20 years or so. So it was in answer, short answer. Well, I gave you a long answer, but the short answer to your question is it wasn't very hard at all. Like, I love doing it.
Yeah. Well, and I like the way that you explain that too, because I think that for a lot of people it's binary. It's, well, this is paying the bills and I'm going to choose to do this because it's just what I've fallen into. And I think that the piece here that's worth highlighting is that, as people are listening, they realize that you can have both. I mean, and I'm a strong proponent of, this both and philosophy or perspective where it's not either or. And you were able to infuse, something that obviously compensated you for your talent and your contributions, but also something that you clearly enjoyed. And you kept that front and center for yourself and continue to infuse that into what you were doing along the way.
Yeah. Well, that's an important part of leadership, I think, isn't it? Right? You have to have that mindset because, in many ways, true leaders are also adventurers. And so, you have to obviously take calculated risks and calculated decisions in terms of where you're going to adventure next.
That's
But you're
right.
be adventuring.
That's
So,
right.
so for me, it's like, life is an adventure, really. And so I know what resonates with me. I know what skills I have, and I try and basically find the cross section of those and make it work and keep evolving. And that's the type of, like, growth mindset I've pretty much tried to inculcate throughout my journey here. I mean, even from, like, London to Miami, right? So
So going back to when you launched your agency,
yeah.
was that around 2015? Is that when you said?
Yeah, the current iteration of the agency was launched around 2015.
And you weren't yet in the United States. Where were you then?
I was in the UK, I was in London. And so we launched in London, and then we quickly started getting clients in the United States. and it evolved to where I had like 95% of my clients in like UK, Europe, to 95% of my clients in the US and 5% over there. So it just made sense to come over here. And even that was an organic development. Is like if you'd asked me, like, where are we at? 2025? Yeah, if you asked me 10 years ago, I would not have guessed that I would be sitting in Miami today.
Hmm.
So
Why do you think there was that shift from, predominantly UK European clients to then US clients?
it's a very interesting question. I think it has to do with the way the US is structured in terms of economically. It's a very small to medium business economy. I would say like roughly, I don't know the exact stats, but from what I remember reading somewhere is roughly around 80% of the economy is small to medium business,
Mhm.
whereas it's the other way around in UK and Europe. And so the need here was greater
Mhm.
in what we were doing. So what we're doing essentially was bringing billion-dollar branding, marketing, advertising, thinking, and experience into businesses in the 1 million to $10 million range annual revenue who wanted to go up to 150 million. So especially when on the e-commerce side of things. And especially even, and it's the same challenge I'm finding with some of the law firms that we're working with as well. They're kind of in that space as well. They're big enough to understand that they need marketing, but they're too small to invest in their own marketing departments. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So there's just a bigger marketplace here. And because we have lived in a global marketplace, and I'm still, I guess, in some ways continue to do so, but because of all of those things, the people in the US could easily reach me in Europe and start contracting me through, for business, etc.
Mhm.
And that's how it evolved. And it was from there, it was just natural evolution. I had to come to the United States to set up a sales office and then move from there. So my initial thinking was to go to LA, where I'd spent a part of my 20s back and forth on various contract projects. And then that was it. And I came to LA, but I settled on Miami because it was close to New York and close to London, and it's sunny.
Yeah, it is. It's clearly a desirable place. I mean, anyone who's living in South Florida knows this boom that we're experiencing down here and have experienced the last, couple of years. When you think about the decision to move over to the US, whether it be LA or ultimately Miami, what was that decision like? And what conversations with yourself did you have to ultimately decide to make that move?
Yeah, I mean, in my mind, there was no real question. Yeah, if you either grow or you don't. And so for me, it was just a natural evolution in my journey, in terms of my entrepreneurial journey, in terms of my life journey. So I had to make that move. So I never thought to myself, I'm not going to do this. So
How much, Roop, do you think your experience living in other parts of the world, having exposure to, other countries, contributed to your comfort of
yeah, that's
relocating?
true. That's true, because I grew up in many different places.
Hmm.
I speak a couple of different languages. So I feel very comfortable moving between different types of cultures.
Yeah,
I don't have much of a problem with that. So it maybe is not as scary for me as somebody who might have grown up in the same town all their life,
right.
where it becomes a harder ask. So yeah, so it was just a coalescing of, I guess, unique life experiences in some ways.
Yeah.
But I think many people can inculcate that type of mindset as long as they're always forward focused in terms of the growth mindset that I talked about, because you never know what opportunities around the corner. And the question is, depends how much you want to do what you say you want to do.
Yeah. And your level of comfort with that, I think that's what you were sort of alluding to too, given your exposure. But that came from your own experience having lived in different countries. But then what I like is that this isn't something that's only available to people who have lived internationally or, traveled extensively. This is available to anybody who makes the choice to see these opportunities or even these challenges in sort of the true Ryan Holiday fashion. The obstacle becomes the way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because if this is daunting or a bit intimidating to think about moving somewhere else, but you know that on the other side of that is growth and opportunity, then all of a sudden it doesn't seem as scary. It seems actually quite exciting. It seems like this is a natural, as you said, a natural progression, natural evolution of oneself or one's career or one's business.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And then also, realizing, I guess, you can always go back, right? And so, but the thing is, it's harder to live with regret than it is than not. So yeah, I mean, I guess from my perspective, it's just like it was just something that I had to do.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, there's always a way, basically. I like what you said about the obstacle is becomes a path.
Yeah, and I think that even the word regret is, a loaded word for a lot of people. It's really about, again, sort of this understanding that it's all choice, and
Yeah.
that we can make the choice to stay with, and this goes back sort of full circle to this kind of culture of innovation and this iteration mindset that you've always maintained. You can stay with what we know
Yeah.
and the comfort of that, the familiarity of that, or we can also find comfort and excitement and joy in pursuing the unknown. And that's the adventurer side that I think any leader, benefits from adopting is we don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. We don't know what this new employee is going to shake out to be, but we're open to what possibilities exist and we know that we can handle them because we're equipped to.
Yeah. And you have to ask those questions of yourself when you get into business because that's essentially what you're doing. And so if you are the type of person that feels more comfortable having a certain level of security and a certain level of familiarity with what you're doing, that's also a valid life choice. I mean,
Absolutely.
it's just so,
Absolutely.
I know plenty of people who do that and they live very fulfilled lives. And it's just really a question. But if entrepreneurs really are just always pioneering and just kind of chasing that next adventure, and they usually sometimes they end up being. That's why there's a high incidence of adrenaline junkies amongst entrepreneurs, I think.
Yeah, I think all of the daily unknowns that we face, and that's true again, I think of leadership. So when you think about your journey, and I think this is where people can draw the parallels, is where's some of that avoidance behavior coming in where perhaps people are thinking, okay, I don't know what's going to happen if I apply for this job or if I leave this organization and go to another one or I leave this country and go work in another country. I mean, of course there are constantly questions like that that come up, but the back to what the point you made is that clear sense of self. Who am I? Can I handle this? What do I prefer? What's my default sort of comfort level with these types of things, then can set you up for success or quote unquote failure. I don't believe in failure, but there's sort of, the is this going to be aligned with who you are and what you want to do based on who you are?
Yeah.
And it starts there. So I love the fact that you're sharing this story of how, again, going all the way back to college years and your involvement in theater and film and then how that's evolved. There's been this constant sense of self that's now led you to where you are now, doing what you do for clients and also iterating constantly along the way.
Yeah, yeah, it's you have to have that level of self-awareness because that's the only way I found, how to keep doing it, basically. Yeah.
So how do you then, Roop, now that you've got a team, you've got a global team,
Yeah.
your business has expanded, your client base has expanded, how do you infuse that into how you lead those working within your organization and ensure that that's part of the culture?
I always tell my team, don't be afraid to fail. Well, I don't completely like that word either because like failure to me, what I say to them is failure to me is just learning how to succeed.
Yeah.
So you have to and take ownership of it as well, and then try and learn from it and iterate and become better. And so when I see that, I'm much more happy than people trying to basically not do anything and stay in safe zones because and so that's an important part of moving forward quickly as well. It's what Zuckerberg used to say. What is it at the beginning of Facebook? Was it move fast and break things? I think it was he used to say.
Right.
So yeah, and then also what Bezos says. the day one mentality. And so my team constantly refer to me like their coach, essentially, because I do end up essentially coaching them through lots of things. And most of my calls with them are just essentially about helping. They usually know the answers.
That's right.
It's about helping them figure the answer out.
Yeah.
And so then I focus more on the strategic elements of the business and let them get on with it.
Well, I think anybody listening to that, hearing how much coaching goes into leadership, will either say, "Oh, yeah, that sounds right," or they may cringe. And what I would encourage anybody who's listening to that is to lean into that, because really coaching is such a huge component of leadership. And as I tell people when I'm working with them one-on-one or I'm doing leadership workshops, the primary responsibility of a leader is to develop their people,
Yeah, correct.
ultimately. And when you develop them and they're off doing what they do so well, which is why you hired them, you can then be free to do the things that you want to do for your business strategically and, sort of more transformationally, rather than having to work in your business the way that the people you've hired ought
Yep.
to be, supported to do. But the piece that I really liked, going back to the the fear of failure, and again, the word failure is one that comes up for me because, again, it goes into this sort of binary thinking. It's either pass or fail, and it's really not about that. It's just sort of the natural evolution of things and learning and growing. But what I really like, and I'm sort of teasing out from your comments, is creating this psychologically safe environment for people to not even have to worry about that as a concern.
Mhm.
Because if they're spending all of their time and energy worrying about if this is going to be a mistake, is this going to be a failure, what they're really worried about is what's going to happen to me. What does this say about me if I make a mistake or if I fail?
Yeah.
And what you're saying is, let's just take that off the table. You're good here. You're safe here. Just do what you do and do it well. And no matter how it turns out, there's going to be something we can learn from it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as long as you're, obviously hard work goes without saying, utilizing your skill set goes without saying. And as long as you went into that particular task with the the right attitude and all the tools available at your disposal and you did your best at it, that's really it. And if a problem comes up, a problem comes up. So, I frequently actually use that. I saw a podcast with Jocko Willink
Mm-hmm.
where he about how when people would come to him and they'd say to him, there's a problem with this or there's a problem with that, etc. And he would just say, good. And so, all right, so let's figure this out because actually it is good because it helps you get better. And that's what I really just focus on with my team.
Yeah, that's
This is
great.
that's also why I believe we deliver the results that we deliver because I try and inculcate that mindset.
Yeah. Well, and I think that when you can create a culture of that, and it's not just you being that in isolation, you have a whole workforce who's working towards that. And I have a number of clients who I'm working with their teams. We have these conversations constantly with how are we getting everyone to row in the same direction, you know? And because ultimately, once everyone can be bought into that same mindset and they all bring their unique talents and skills and experiences to the table, now we're really humming.
Mhm.
But it does require that foundational culture and perspective and mindset to ensure that ultimately we're all showing up as our best selves. So
Yeah.
when you think about the culture that you've now created, is there a situation that comes to mind, or is there an example maybe of a circumstance that was challenging where you had to really lean on your leadership with your team or with a client or with a shift in the market or your business?
Yeah, so I guess one of the things recently, one of our clients came to us and they were like, we can't handle all these leads. And so
It's a good
so
problem
I
to have.
yeah, it was a good problem to have, but they were getting a little bit frustrated by it basically. So I essentially had one of my guys check into their back end processes and look at their sales pipeline in terms of what was happening there. And I was like, well, you can handle these leads with AI if we were to do these different things basically. And so what went from a conversation like we can't handle leads, turn off the ads, reduce the budget, it's too much, like etc. It went from that. Really what they were saying is that we don't have the infrastructure to support this right now, and so we need to hire more. And so but they're also getting very good results. So I didn't want to slow the machine down. So I basically had to lead them with my team through that, and understand that there are other solutions if they think about things slightly differently in terms of like handling that. And now we've implemented that into, AI voice agent pipelines basically into their system. They can take calls at scale, and qualify on short intakes, and then their human team can basically focus on the right leads, and they end up actually making more money. So yeah, so that was interesting. From what went from a conversation about like reducing the scope because they couldn't handle the leads, turned into actually an increase in scope.
Yeah. Well, I think it's easy for all of us, and we all encounter this at various points throughout our lives or careers, to be fixated on what limited possibilities there might be based on a certain, set of circumstances. And then we just fixate on those limited possibilities. And as I tell my clients all the time, this is a conversation about any and all possibilities. So
Yeah,
let's not limit ourselves here to what you think is the only options available. What if? Let's just play. Let's just explore. Could it be in the realm of possibility that we could do this? Could we try that? Have you tried this? Have you said that? And then once you realize that you're working, as your clients are with you, with somebody who doesn't feel limited in the way that they do, it's such a breath of fresh air to realize that not only do you see possibilities that they don't, you have a whole team that's there to then support them in implementing and creating these possibilities, not just as, as hypotheticals, but as something real that can be implemented.
yeah, yeah. So in many senses, I mean, the business owners end up, the ones that deliver the best results also end up, I think, becoming not just coaches to their internal team, but also coaches to their clients too.
Right.
So, coaching them through those specific set of problems that they face in whatever service offering that they have.
Right. And you can
And
imagine that client next time, if they find themselves in a similar situation, not maybe apples to apples, but a similar situation, what's their response going to be next time? It's not going to be this automatic default to, oh, that's it, turn it all off.
yeah,
They're going to remember that there are possibilities here, and there are those little shifts that occur because of the way that you engage in that way.
true. But then some people also have a propensity to panic.
For sure.
And so you just have to tell them, just breathe.
Yeah.
Let's figure this out. Let's look at the problem. All right. So this is the problem. You're trying to go from A to B. What if we just, like, instead of going in a linear fashion, why don't we just fly over to B and see, like, can this solve this problem? And just take step by step, right? And that's what I mean by it, even in terms of leadership of your clients, because clients are busy on so many other different things. They're being harassed by their team, they're being harassed by their clients, etc. And they're thinking they've got to make payroll, they've got to do this, they've got to do that, their CPA wants this, etc. There's a lot of stuff going on, right? And so sometimes, any one of us can forget, especially when a problem pops up. So yeah, it's just a question. You're just going to help coach them through that problem. And if you can't solve the problem, then that's fine, but you have to help work them through that problem as well. So
Yeah. Well, and having that trusted advisor, that trusted partner or resource is obviously invaluable. And I think that you're right. People do fall into those patterns and, they do have a propensity for panic sometimes. But I think that as they start to see that way of showing up or that way of responding doesn't always serve them, they also realize that, okay, Roop can't be a crutch, or, Hakeem, my coach, can't be a crutch, that I'm going to have to figure this out for myself, because at some point in time, I'm going to be faced with this situation, whatever it may be, personal or professional, and panic isn't going to serve me. And I'm going to have to explore possibilities on my own. So I do love the fact that you and your team offer that up as part of your services, not as something that you're marketing, but obviously that just a benefit to what you provide your clients through what the agency provides. And I think as leaders, that absolutely is something that you have to be open to, because it's going to be something that's, sort of forever evolving, forever changing as
yeah,
as the world evolves.
no, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Leadership's all about asking the right questions, whether it be your team, whether it be your clients, whether it be your vendors, whatever it may be. It's just about asking the right questions and making sure that you're going down the right path.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's complex. Yeah, complex.
Simplifying it a little bit, and it's a good segue. As people are listening to this and they're hearing your story, they're hearing about how you interact with your clients, how you interact with your team, the business and culture that you've built, what would you say is a skill or attribute that people ought to focus on if they want to become better leaders themselves?
Self-reflection, I think, is important. I think, did you do everything that you could? Did you do your best? Yeah, did you show up as the best version of yourself? And one of the ways that I do that actually is I journal basically every day. And I think that's an important part, because your life is really built from your daily habits. And so if you can get your daily habits right, you can generally get yourself in the right direction of where you want to go. Yeah, self-reflection, I think, making sure that I think that's the most important thing.
Well, and I love that you journal too, because I think this goes right back to the observing of where patterns occur. And
Mhm.
it's such a great way of doing that, because if you find yourself journaling and reflecting and kind of doing a self audit, if you will, you start to notice patterns emerge. And it's difficult to do that on a day-to-day basis in real time when you're just executing and getting through your day. But
Yeah,
to find the time and space to actually reflect and audit and evaluate, it allows you then to see those things. And the yes and to that is doing all of that from a place of non-judgment. Because if you're
yeah.
judging yourself and you're hypercritical of yourself the whole time that you're doing it, it's sort of losing its value a bit, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. But yeah, I think, our lives are quite busy. So if you don't stop and just, look around and just kind of examine what you're up to and whether you're on the right path, I think that, you can get very busy in busy work, but not necessarily achieve anything.
Yeah.
So I think so I think that is very key, just to like take stock every day. Like, what were my goals today? Did I achieve them? And if I did, great. If I didn't, why not? Sort of thing, So I think that is a very important skill, because that's what keeps you moving forward.
100%. I couldn't agree more. And I know, speaking of busy, that you have a busy day ahead of you today. I appreciate you taking the time to be here. Can you tell us a little bit about where people can find out more about you and your agency and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. You can go to fifthweapon.com. That's FIFTH weapon.com, and at Fifth Weapon on all the social media channels, from LinkedIn to Instagram to TikTok. Though we're not very active on TikTok. And
Fair enough. Yeah. Well, and I'll
yeah,
include I'll include all those links in the show notes as well, so people can reference them though. Roop, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate you sharing a little bit about your journey, about your business, about your evolution as a leader. It's been great to have the conversation.
thank you for having me, Hakeem.
As always, I'd love to hear from you about the episode. What came up for you as you think about leveling up your own leadership game? And please, if you enjoyed the episode, I encourage you to like and subscribe. And if you want to connect with me, you can find me on LinkedIn at Hakeem A. Lakhdar or on lakhdarcoaching.com. Thanks for tuning in. Keep being great, and we'll see you next time.